Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we shall be covering episode 67, The School Scam, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Monster Teacher. This episode was originally released in Japan on January 25th, 2003, as the 67th episode, while the English dub by 4Kids was released on March 27th, 2004, also as the 67th episode. This episode is meant to be a sequel to a previous episode, that being episode 58, Enemy Elementary, which is an episode I've already reviewed, so I check that episode and my episode review of it out if you'd like more context regarding this episode. But regardless, let us start with the episode story as we always do. This episode opens with a recap of episode 58, Enemy Elementary, as I mentioned earlier, done by none other than King Dedede, which is rather interesting as normally these recaps are done by Tiff or, a narrator. Now, normally I rather dislike the reuse of footage as a lot of times it's just a way to save on budget, but I will say I think this episode utilized it in a manner that enhanced the episode rather than detract from it. It's also more fun thanks to the narrative that Dedede gives as he tries to paint this abusive propaganda mill as being a genuine attempt to educate the students on how to behave properly. With his combination of detention and gym, he then laments how Kirby ruined everything and blew up his plans. It is also here that we see the first changes between versions. Firstly, the exact footage used in this recap is changed slightly between versions, and in the Japanese original, there is in the background a remix of the ending theme from the original Kirby's Dream Land, which I've reviewed if you're interested in learning about that game. The English dub, due to 4Kids' incompetence, did not get the rights to use the music for some reason, even though that normally comes with the ability to broadcast a show. But anyway, resuming with the plot, the king cries about this as we cut to the castle balcony at sunrise. He then notices the sniveling snail Escargoon is sleeping and not really listening to his plight. The king confronts Escargoon for this, and the snail is honest in that he wasn't really, listening to the king's plight, leading to the king clobbering over the head with a hammer. And then he declares that he shall teach those kids a lesson, as he yells out that the Dedede Academy is back in business, as the camera pans over to Capitan, and we cut to that sweet, jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we go to Tiff, who is trying her best to teach a class outside about some basic math skills, but it seems that her teaching method sees her entire class become falling asleep. I'd like to take note of how this episode is the first time Mayor Len Blustergas's grandchildren appear without him also showing up. Interesting little detail, not really that important, but it's just fascinating. Tiff laments her teaching style before suddenly the horrible bird, Decory, horridly insults her student body by saying that it's not her teaching style that's flawed, but rather the quality of her students themselves. Tiff says she has no idea what to do, suggesting it might not be the right class, to which the wretched, horrible bird says that this class got no class. His cruel, unjustified laughing is likely cut off when it starts to rain. This causes the class to flee. Ironically, despite one of the campy kids complaining about their book getting wet, all leave their books to get utterly ruined as they flee to safety. Tiff sighs that her class is dismissed. Takori meekly tries to make her feel better by saying that their brain was already wet, but much like most things Takori does, it doesn't really help. We then cut to the king's throne room where we see Dedede call up the enemy sales guy who greets the king and who tells him to shut up and says that he has scholastic problems. The sales guy asks for clarification, and the king explains that enemy promised to help the king make a school, but they failed, with the Japanese original having him outright say that the school kit was a, pile of crap. The sales guy asks what he means, with the king explaining that the school they sent is trash, with Escargoon saying that the students learned nothing. The enemy sales guy suggests that they bring in some new blood to the student body to invigorate learning. The king agrees, and Escargoon suggests they get the toughest there is, with the king saying the students will be worse than the teachers this go around. The delivery service machine then sends over the characters of the week, that being these three thuggish children. Since they're introduced now and they're basically the character of the week, let us discuss them for a bit. Starting off the bat, we got Smirk, who is the leader of the three hooligans. His name in the Japanese original is Banchow, though sometimes translated as Kent. This Japanese term is for someone who leads a band of juvenile delinquents, which honestly fits. In terms of design, he has the face only a mother could love. It kind of looks like a bulldog and wears an outfit that resembles a biker, sort of military junta type individual. When it comes to voice acting, sadly for Smirk alongside the other two delinquents, I couldn't really find out who was their Japanese voice actor. They do a fine enough job, but it's honestly not that memorable compared to the English dub voice, who in the case of Smirk is done by Andrew Ranellis, who is notable for also voicing Mako Tishuami from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters and starring in the 2011 Broadway musical The Book of Mormon, who does a great job as overall a good leader of a band of school punks. Then there is Kirk, whose name in Japan comes from the word yota, which means idle gossip, nonsense, or good for nothing fellow, which is often translated as Link. In terms of design, he has a cool purple mohawk and a neat set of shades, with a golden chain as a weapon. He's voiced in the English dub by Mark Thompson, another good voice actor, most well known for voicing Kevin Thompson in MTV's Daria, and does a great job, even if it's somewhat of a one note character. I still think it's a fascinating performance. Last but not least of the trio is Dirk, the small reptile guy with a fish-like fin on the head and some glam rock tattoos. In the Japanese original, his name comes from the word gururu, which means to stray from the right path, which again makes sense given his, school punk nature. He's often, translated though as meaning Dell. So the three names are Dell, Link, and Kent. Get it? Delinquent. It's a pretty mediocre pun, but I like the English names of all three better, as is the voice acting done by Matty Blostein, who also voiced Kawasaki in this anime and does an amazing job. Overall, all three of these punks are rather memorable in terms of design, and they have some good voice performances, even if some of them are somewhat one note. And they do play a very important role in the episode, which we shall, get to eventually. The enemy sales guy bids them farewell as Escargoon comments as that they're more likely to be facing time than doing homework. He tells them to say something, to which Dirk tells him off, as Kirk says they don't listen to anyone, which Smirk says includes Dedede the blue dude. Escargoon says they could show a little respect as Dedede introduces himself as principal, before both get hit in the head by a pie. Escargoon tells them to hold the pies for class, to which he gets a brick to the head in kind. head, causes him to collapse. Smirk and the others then head out to the school. Kirk breaks a light bulb, and we see them push the doors off their handles into the hall. They hope the school is better built than this place, or they'll have no challenge tearing it down. Escargoon is enraged by their behavior, but the king laughs, saying they remind him of his own childhood, which is charming. We cut to later that day as Tiff is informed by the king that they want her to teach at their rebuilt school, as she's the best teacher in the area. Tuff sardonically says that the other teachers are likely to be monsters, but Escargoon clarifies that the staff will be all cappies, except for Tiff, with Dedede saying that she will have absolute control over the subject matter and contents of the class. Tiff, intrigued, asks if she will be able to, choose the textbooks and homework, which Dedede assures her yes, she will. Tiff asks if they promise not to interfere in the lessons, to which the king agrees, but asks if she'd be willing to take into her class some problem students. Tiff asks what kind of help, to which Escargoon performs a devious lie and explains that they just need help with some minor socialization issues. In the Japanese original, he claims that when opening the school, they had to take in some poor exchange students. Honestly, both justifications are perfectly fine, and Dee says it would be a fun challenge to make them into straight-A students. Tiff hesitantly thinks it over. She goes to Meta Knight and asks his opinion on if she should go into this potential trap. His answer is where we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says while it is suspicious that she should be up to the challenge, and says as long as she believes in herself, there is something to be gained, even if she fails. The English dub changed this to how she asks him how can she know if it's a trick, to which he says this is life and you can't know, and she's got to take the risk. It may end up being a mistake, but it would even be a bigger mistake not to try, and walks away. Honestly, both versions are perfectly fine and give off a mysterious aura. Tiff, with this in mind, decides to try and see if she's meant to be a teacher, as she looks out on Dedede Academy. We cut then to the first day of school as we get a look inside the classroom, which has a photo of Dedede, as we see the students giving the creed, which itself is a parody to Agiba Totoshi, a graduation song sung in Japan that used to be very widespread until the 1990s, when its antiquated vocabulary and social norms saw it decline. Though, when this anime was originally released back in the early 2000s, most people who watch it would, recognize it. So that's interesting. Tiff is seen entering into the room, and she is greeted by an eraser put on the door, which falls on her head, causing the class to laugh at her. We also see that there is a security camera in place where Dee and Escargoon are recording everything, and they laugh at Tiff's suffering. Tiff says as she goes to the desk that they have gotten off to a rough start, but they're here to learn and not play pranks, as she looks out on the class, especially at three new students, as she then goes to introduce the other school staff, which include Gengu, the toy store owner, as the science teacher, Curio, the professor, as the world history teacher, Chief Bookums as a social science teacher, Melman the mailman as a PE instructor, and Mabel as the history/art teacher. Sadly, soon after their introduction, they are pelted with eggs and tomatoes, which are flung by Kirk and Dirk. Tiff slams her folder on the table and tells them to stop. The three snicker as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, she's far more submissive/kind. She says to Kirk and Dirk that that's a delicious egg and tomato, and they should share some with the class, which confuses them. To which Kirk says she sure got guts, and Dirk says she should go home and clean, just full-blown misogynist neckbeard type response. In response, Tiff says she will, but first she has to clean up some impolite students. It's a bit weird. In the English dub, instead, Tiff tells Kirk as punishment he's got to write a 10-page essay on eggs. And the same is issued to Dirk, who has to write a 10-page essay on tomatoes. I prefer the English dub here. I just think it sounds better and honestly makes a lot more sense as a punishment. Kirk laughs as she's trying to teach them a lesson, while Dirk says that no teacher has ever taught them anything. To which she says that they've never had a teacher like her, and she tells them to sit down and be quiet. The two are shocked, and Tiff tells them she won't say it again. Smirk tells the two little guys to calm down and that they will get their revenge on her soon enough. Tiff then says she shall be teaching math now and that the other teachers can leave, and they do so with a sigh, already tired of these new students' abuse. We see Dirk and Kirk look at Smirk confused as he laughs ominously. Tiff starts the lesson with a simple formula. As she does so, a shoe is tossed at her head, which hits her so hard it causes her to hit her head on the blackboard. The three bullies laugh while Dedede and Escargoon also laugh, watching the whole event. Tuff goes up to his sister and points out the obvious, that it was the three in the back. She knows and calls them out to show their feet to see who threw the shoe. However, Dirk, Kirk, and Smirk all have a pretty solid alibi, as their feet are overall just too big for such a small shoe. Tiff takes it in stride, however, and says that she now has a new pencil holder. We see Smirk actually do something smart as he points out that they haven't been given any textbooks. Tiff then has Spikehead and Iroh pass out books to all the students. Dirk, when it's his turn, slyly takes two of them. Tiff opens the book to page 5 to start the first problem, but then is hit in the head by a book thrown at her, and she tells everyone to pick up their books to expose who did it. But sadly, due to Dirk's devious intelligence, he doesn't get caught, even though he's clearly guilty. She then talks to her brother about what the problem is, and he says confused that this math question is a very hard one. Tiff says it's a basic mathematic equation and that mathematics are important to living a everyday life. Meanwhile, Kirk uses a fishing rod that he somehow snuck into class, as well as some bubble gum, which, if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed that he was chewing on earlier, and attaches it to the string, which then attaches to Kirby's head, causing him to be forced to move up and down. Now, a lot of people like to say Tiff is, too smart, an annoying know-it-all. I would always point to this specific scene as we see Tiff blame Kirby for this, even though, given her position, it should be clear that Kirk is doing it. I mean, seriously, how does she not see this? Also, you know, it just makes me wonder how Kirk manages to move Kirby around with such a, short fishing rod. I mean, it's kind of weird. It's sort of cartoon logic, so I don't really mind, but still. I think that this scene is definitely one of Tiff's, dumbest moments in the anime, honestly. Though, to play devil's advocate, maybe it's because, she's under a lot of stress as a teacher. Regardless, Kirby seems to bounce around, causing havoc in the classroom. Tiff and Tuff tell him to cut it out. Of course, the baby is not at fault and has no control, so he doesn't stop bouncing around. Tiff tries to grab him, but fails at first, asking what is wrong with him. Eventually, she does grab him. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, she and Kirby are hung around a bit more in the air as Kirk messes around with a fishing pole. The English dub removed this as they just crash into the windowsill, falling outside with tons of shattered glass. While the students look out, Dedede and Escargoon arrive as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Dedede and Escargoon tease her that violence is against school policy and that she should think of the students' safety first, while in the English dub has them ask sarcastically if Kirby is dropping out. Honestly, both versions are fine. They give off a sort of anti-teacher bias, and both end with the two goobers laughing as Tiff is annoyed. She then turns to Kirby and says she never expected him to be a problem boy, and Kirby can just sit there saddened that he's getting blamed for something he didn't really do. We cut to the next day as we see a news report from Channel Dedede. Asgargoon falsely reports Tiff being utterly incompetent and blaming her for what is happening, even when it's clearly the new student's fault. We see King and Dedede discuss it as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, there's a sign behind them that reads Dedede News in clean English that 4 Kids for some reason felt the need to airbrush out. No idea why. It just kind of weakens the scene, even if only in a minor way. Plus, it's perfectly fine English. It's not even English, so, just odd. The two discuss Tiff's statement that she won't quit despite the bad students, with the king saying that there are no bad students, only bad teachers, and, lambasts her for teaching them math, not discipline. Escargoon then interviews and asks Professor Curio on if Tiff is a bad teacher. He tries to give an honest answer, but Escargoon twists his words into implying that Tiff threatened him into silence with violence, and that despite being a math teacher, her days are numbered. Watching this broadcast, Tuff says that it was the bullies, not his sister's fault that all this is happening. Cerebral, her father, says regardless, she is a little over her head, and Tuff defends his sister, but his mother, Lady Lack, asks where exactly is Tiff, as her brother looks around confused. We then cut to Tiff talking to Meta Knight, who she asks to teach her how to defend herself, mentioning how Knuckle Joe is not there. It's neat to see him mentioned despite, not appearing in the episode. It makes the world seem a lot more alive. Meta Knight is a bit hesitant to teach her such things, but after she explains why she needs it, he agrees to do it. We then see a training montage where, under Meta Knight, Tiff undergoes several training regimes, including punching the air, punching a punching bag, and running down the beach. Overall, she does a good job for as short a period as it is. We then cut to the next school day where we see Spikehead and Honey are scared of going back to school. In the Japanese original, Honey's mom tries to calm her daughter by saying that she should be okay because the bad teacher was fired. In the English dub, she says that the bullies can't be that bad. Both versions are good for what they are trying to be, as the students complain about the horrible conditions. Tiff is watching from behind a tree in a nearby forest, where she says that she must do something. We then cut to inside the classroom, where Curio, who has been holding down the fort, is coming unwound at the seams. In the Japanese original, we see that he has had various weapons like swords and spears thrown at him. He is almost hit in the head by a double-sided axe thrown at him by one of the bullies. 4 Kids, fearing that this would promote violence, removed these scenes, which is a shame as I think it highlights how violent these bullies are. In both versions, Smirk says he can't quit, as Dirk says he's way more fun to pick with than the last one. Notice he holds the shoe from earlier, as he's now so confident at this time that he's not even concerned about getting caught, and he tosses at Kirby, who just sits there depressed. We see then lunch delivered by Kawasaki as Curio flees the classroom in fear. Kawasaki then gives out his lima bean liver stew, which sounds disgusting already, but we see Kirk put in a centipede with the stew as Kawasaki is distracted giving out food. Honey is seen trying to have an open mind. In the Japanese original, she says itagakimushi, which is a Japanese phrase that means thank you before eating, but is disgusted by the centipede upon seeing it in her stew and screams in horror. We then see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, we see a scene of Gengu being tied up by copper wire. He begs the trio of thugs not to press the switch, as it could conduct electricity. Kirk asks why the hell not, which is pretty blatant, probably why this scene was removed. And they then flick the switch, electrocuting the poor dude. 4 Kids removed this scene, likely due to either, as I mentioned before, the strong language or the belief that it could promote to violence. And frankly, much like the previous change, it seems like a vestige of the moral panic of the 1990s, with the parents' rights group being strangulating entertainment and thinking any form of violence is inherently bad for kids, which is just childish and stupid. No, if little Timmy plays Doom, they're not going to shoot up a school like Columbine. You're just delusional. In both versions, we then see the poor mailman being put on a bungee cord and pushed off the ledge. We then cut to Bookums getting hit in the head by Kirby, who the three bullies are using as a tennis ball with rackets. We then see the last class with Mabel having paint thrown in her face. Angry, she says that the only art they are good at is the art of making others miserable, which is very relatable to some people. Kirk, however, says it seems like a good face painting. In the Japanese original, he is outright sexist and tells her to go home and make a sandwich. Which, I mean, wow. Mabel then leaves, but is shocked to see Tiff arrive and slinks away, sort of ashamed that she left in such a huff. The three bullies laugh at their success at running all the teachers off, and that they're the teachers now. Tuff is annoyed while the other classmates are just huddled in fear, scared of the three guys. Tiff, however, arrives to the bully's shock, and they ask what is she doing here since she was run out. Tiff says she's here to take charge. Dirk says she doesn't count too good for a math teacher, as it's 3-on-1. To which Tiff says that may be true, but that she has one brain while they got none. Smirk says it's time for a toughness test, and Tiff agrees. Dirk throws a chair at her, but she dodges it and it bounces off the desk and right back at him, hitting him right in the head, knocking him out. Kirk then uses his chain at her, but she grabs it. The two do a bit of a tug of war, but Tiff cleverly releases it, causing Kirk to fall backwards and get hit by his own chain, knocking him out. Smirk then punches a bunch of chairs, which are sent raining down on the other students. He compliments Tiff as being a good brawler, and says it's a shame he's got to clobber her. We see the next change between versions here. In the Japanese original, she asks if he's fixed his bedwetting problem, or if wearing diapers fixed the issue. The English dub has this change to her saying that she'll send him packing, either willingly or not. Both versions are fine and are fair smack talk, because let's be honest, these douchebags are terrible. Enraged, Smirk goes to hit her, charging, but she dodges, causes him to twirl around like a tornado and crash into the wall, knocking himself out. We see the three bullies knocked out as Tiff breathes heavily. The class is in shock, including Doron, who is there for some reason, as is the horrid bird Takori, but they cheer her on for beating the bullies. But Tiff tells them to stop as she cries for one of the few times in the anime. The others try to assure her that it's not her fault that this happened, as the bullies were bad, but she disagrees and goes into a speech, the substance of which are vastly changed between versions. Tiff says in the Japanese original that while hot-headed teachers may seem like the right answer, but in reality, that teachers are in a very vulnerable position. How, if they try to be nice, everyone will call them unmotivated, but if you're too harsh, you're considered abusive. We watch various campies watching Tiff as she begs for people to not put all blame on teachers, please. In the English dub, she says that teachers are meant to use their heads, not their fists, and wishes she could show even these guys the joy of education and how the most important thing for a teacher to do is to help people learn, and asks that people never give up on the desire to learn things. Honestly, both versions I think are great, and they have a very strong message that I'll talk to in a little bit. In both versions, she then goes to leave, but is stopped by Dedede and Escargoon, who are impressed by her speech. Plus, they point out how all the other teachers have left, and thus she cannot leave. Tiff rightfully points out how they've been trying to get rid of her this entire time, but Dedede says in response that he's changed his mind, while Escargoon tells her to get back to teaching. But before she can do so, a purple tentacle grabs it, and it's revealed that the three punks have fused into the monster of the week. Now, this form has a name which is a bit contentious. I've seen it referred to MT2 and Bonchu, which is also the name for, smirk. For the sake of clarity, I'll just call it MT2. In terms of design, it's actually pretty horrifying if you think about it. Being this totem pole entity where only Smirk is still sentient and has a purple mohawk that functions like a tentacle, with the legs of them being sort of remolded and function kind of like a propeller. If it wasn't for the Kirby art style, this would be a sort of Eldritch abomination, Cronenberg thing type abomination. It's honestly kind of creepy. There's an interesting difference between versions when it comes to the voice. In the Japanese original, all three voices speak as one, which is creepy, while the English dub only has Smirk voice speaking. I think this is another instance of 4Kids changing something for the worse. Even if it's admittedly a little minor, I just feel like the idea of having all voices speak as one is just very creepy, and they could have done that. He picks up Tiff and flings her to the ground. The other students fight for their teacher, throwing books and school supplies at the monster, which in turn distracts it as he then spits out a bunch of random weapons, which were a weird breath attack. But Tiff tells Kirby to suck it up, which he does so in order to become. Fighter Kirby. I've talked about this ability in 5 previous episodes. It's a relatively common ability that I've reviewed before. These include episode 19, Here Comes the Sun, episode 40, Monster Management, episode 53, Snack Attack Part 2, episode 58, Enemy Elementary, and episode 65, Monster 2.0, all of which I've reviewed before, so feel free to check those out if you want to learn more about it. But to keep it brief, it made the transition to anime well. And this would be the last episode it appears in. Does it go off on a bang? Well, let's continue the plot to see that. Fighter punches MT2, which causes it to fall to the ground, but he is then slapped by the Mohawk into the wall before then being crashing Kirby through the wall with its own mass. The others go to the hole in the wall to watch the fight between MT2 and Kirby, as Tiff is worried about Kirby's safety. The two stare at each other as Escargoon activates an electric fence, which surrounds the schoolyard. MT2 charges Kirby, who then does a smash punch, as we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Kirby calls out the names of his attacks. 4Kids remove this, and honestly, I think that's one of the few changes that is an unironic positive, as the less Kirby talks, the better, in my honest opinion. I've always preferred him as a more of a silent character, plus he's meant to be a baby, so it makes sense. He does a spin kick, which pushes MT2 to the ground. He then does some Vulcan jobs, but MT2 easily deflects them with his Mohawk tentacle. And he then strikes Kirby, causing him to go into the fence, getting him electrocuted. He charges and Kirby dodges, but gets his foot grabbed by the monster, who then slams him down on the ground multiple times, as he tells him goodbye, and then flings him at the fence again. But Kirby this time manages to disable the fence, using various Vulcan jabs, which annoys the monster. Tiff and the others cheer Kirby on. MT2 charges at Kirby, which Kirby answers with a rising break, sending him into the air and then crashing into the school, causing it to explode, killing the monster and sending the bell, Dedede, and Escargoon flying into the air. It is here that we see the final change between versions. In the Japanese original, Dedede complains about the sound of the bell, while the English dub changes it to him saying that he failed again, with Escargoon saying there's always next semester. Honestly, both versions are fine, and it's nice to see Dedede get some comeuppance for his treatment of Tiff. We then cut to Tiff teaching a class beneath a tree, similar to the beginning of this episode. Sadly, it's not very effective, as everyone has gone to sleep again from the very simple math equation. But she takes it in stride, saying that at least it's her own class, and the episode ends with Kirby sleeping. Now that we've covered the story, let's talk about the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts on this episode as a whole. Starting with the positives, I found that this episode had a really great theme and story. The truth is that teachers get a lot of deal of crap from people and are greatly underappreciated by wider society. which views them as just being expendable. This is best exemplified by Dedede, and how they have to have both kindness and firmness in order to balance the problem with students. And speaking of that, I have to say that Dirk, Kirk, and Smirk are another positive. These three not only all have pretty stellar designs, but perfectly capture the essence of some really problematic bullies. I mean, they may not be the most three dimensional characters out there, but I think that anyone who's ever had to go to a public or private school has definitely encountered some of these, thuggish type people. And they do display the cruel cunning seen in a lot of school bullies that I think we're all familiar about. It also have to say that their monster form was very cool looking, honestly, and would be a lot more creepy if it wasn't for the Kirby art style. I also have to say that I thought Fire Kirby was excellently used here. It's its last appearance in the anime, and I have to say I think it went out with a bang. The fight scene was very fun to watch. And I thought that Tiff's role in the episode was very engaging, and you really felt the struggle of a teacher by watching her. And Meta Knight acting as her mentor was neat to see, and I kind of wish they had done more with that. Even if, admittedly, Meta Knight's role was a little minor. Let us, however, now go on to the negatives, starting with those that I have, and they're comparatively minor, and it mostly relates to the changes slash censorship that Four Kids did. I think it only weakened the episode and was based more on an unjustified moral panic than any reasonable explanation. Not that there ever really is a reasonable explanation for censorship, but still, it's just childish. As for other complaints, I've seen others complain that the episode is just a repeat of episode 58, Enemy Elementary, but I think that is an oversimplification. While both explore the themes of the issues of public education, they do so from different perspectives, and thus I think both stand on their own and are equally valid. I've also seen some say that the episode is anti public education and was a negative view of students. But again, I feel this is one of those takes that really lacks nuance. It's very clear by the ending that they're not against education itself. Rather, they're critical of the overly standardized sorts of education, which can be bad in a lot of situations. Plus, it doesn't say that all students are bad, just that there's a few people who, frankly, probably shouldn't be in these sorts of environments in the first place. And that's a fair criticism to anyone who's actually gone to public education, I think. I mean, I was bullied by a bunch of people. It's especially bad since I was like the only white kid in the, school, but that's a topic for another day. Overall, though, despite these minor flaws, I would say that this is an amazing episode. While not in my personal top 10, at least not now, I would have to go back and rewatch the entire series to properly rank all the episodes. I think this is a must watch and that you will definitely enjoy it if you're binging the series. Though I do recommend you watch the similarly great episode 58 before doing this, as it'll make it more enjoyable. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. If you liked this video, liked it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing and have a wonderful day.